This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It's not to be taken as financial advice.
In my journey, it's been nothing but generosity and people wanting to help and support. With that said, in the real estate industry, there are so many sharks. There are people who could give a darn about you. They're happy to take your money and sell you garbage. It's why you've got to do your due diligence. I feel like the wealthy aren't coming from that place, but people trying to be wealthy may be willing to step on you and rip you off to get there.
You're listening to the RE Social Podcast with your hosts, Andrew and Vince from OnV Invest. For more information, go to onvinvest.com.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Today we have a super special guest. I'm a huge fan. We have Kathy Fettke from Real World. If you guys don't know who she is, you are probably living under a rock for the last 500 years. She's been a tremendous force in the real estate space and actually helped me guide through making decisions before the market shifts. So that's been one of my biggest plus. So Kathy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so sweet. I appreciate it.
So for the, you're also the first women investor on our show as well. So that's cool.
Woohoo! Let's get some more on. Yeah.
I know. We need to get some more on here. It's tough.
I can give you a list.
Oh yeah, sure. We'll talk to them. So for people who don't know who you are, who've been living under a rock without internet, can you give a little background?
Sure. Yeah. Somehow I found myself with an investor group of over 60,000 investors today. We've been helping. It's been quite a journey. Started in 2003, and we've just continued to grow and change and adapt with the changing market. So that's kind of the overall. But yeah, it started in 2003, kind of by accident.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know the story, with Rich and his things that you guys were going through and how you guys started. So it's a really inspiring story. But for people who don't know, so did your parents hand you like $10 million to get started? How did it work?
There were so many reasons I should have been born rich, really, just so many.
I know.
Apparently my grandmother traced our history, and we were related to princess of Hawaii, and my ancestors owned Waikiki. I don't know. We didn't get anything.
Yeah.
Also, my brother-in-law came over to our house, oh my gosh, in 2000 something, and said, "Hey, I've got this investment I want to tell family about first. It's a way to find things faster on the internet." We all kind of looked at each other like, well, AOL is so fast. Why would you need anything else? I think you know the end of the story. We could have been the first investors in Google. So there's a lot of reasons why I should have been, a trust fund child, but I wasn't. And I was the youngest of five. My dad was, they were immigrants, and my mom was raised kind of, I don't know how to say it, but she had a single mom. There were five kids, and they were kind of trailer park family. So it's amazing that, to come from a family that really didn't understand wealth, didn't understand money, never taught me. And that's why in 2003, when my husband found out that he had melanoma and the doctor thought it had spread, and he had been a bodybuilder, so he did all that tanning stuff. And I always told him, don't do the tanning booths. But he's like, oh, they have plenty of studies saying it doesn't cause any problems. Well, 20 years later, he got skin cancer, and the deadly kind. So be careful of tanning beds. That's the moral of the story.
Hey, I was born tan, so I'm good.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah.
You're perfect. So he basically, I'm like, well, what are we going to do? I refused to believe that, my big, strong husband was going to die from a freckle. But, that was the reality of things back then. They didn't have really a cure for melanoma. So I just thought, you need to get off the treadmill. You need to spend time, if the doctor's right, make the last 6 months of your life wonderful, and I'll figure out the money. And the problem is I'd been a stay-at-home mom for a while and kind of forgot how to make money. It's hard to leave a career and then come back in. Things change. And so I didn't really know how to do it, but I did have a radio show. My background was in broadcasting, still had that radio show. And I didn't make any money on it, but I thought I'm going to use this platform to understand how people make this thing called passive income. I'd heard about it. I didn't know much about it, but I heard people talk about making money from your money. I just didn't get how that works, but I did have a platform where I could interview people. And that's what I did. And I became obsessed in the mission of trying to understand it.
And so it all started for you in 2003, huh?
2003. Yep. And
Wow.
it went fast. Yeah.
And then what did you buy? Did you buy a single family home or did you buy a 100-unit complex?
Well, in 97, kind of before all of this, I learned a little bit because my dad had owned an apartment. They weren't very good managers of it. He invested in it, I should say, in somebody's syndication. They were not great managers, not very communicative. He had been taking deductions for years. And suddenly one day he got a letter in the mail, no phone call, nothing, saying they'd sold it. And all of a sudden, a lot of people don't realize when you sell an asset, you got to pay the taxes, the capital gains on that, but you also have the recapture of all the deductions you've had unless you 1031 it. So he gets this letter and they said, oh, we sold it. But by the time he received the letter, he only had 2 weeks to find a replacement property. So he was in a panic. He was just about to retire. He didn't want to be a landlord. So our first property, right, the year that we got married in 97, I said, hey, Dad, how can I help you out? Maybe we can be your tenant and we can find the replacement property and just live in it. And, he's like, cool. So that was kind of how we got our first property, is just helping my dad out of a difficult situation, which is how a lot of people get in, is if you can solve a problem, sometimes you can get a great deal. So I solved my dad's problem. He did the exchange. I picked out the house. We lived in it. I turned it into a fourplex. And I told my dad, we'll take care of all the expenses. We'll take care of everything if we can inherit this property someday. And he agreed. So we refied, we paid him back anything he'd ever put in it, turned it into a fourplex. And, that was kind of our first investment. But in 2003, I hadn't really learned much beyond that. So I started, again, just interviewing. That's when, right around 2005, I had Robert Kiyosaki on the Real Wealth Show. And that's when I learned about out-of-state buy and hold investing, because he explained, and I knew that these bad loans that were being given out, these no income, no asset NINA loans, give anyone can sign on the dotted line and get a home with some money back. That wasn't going to turn out well, especially since those loans were going to people who had shown no track record of paying their bills. They were subprime loans for the most part. So Kiyosaki came on the Real Wealth Show and said, look, this is going to blow up. They're already slated to reset by 2007. People aren't going to be able to make these payments. So you got to reposition yourself and get out of the coming storm. And one of the places that he identified was Texas, because at the time it still does today, but back then it had the highest job growth and population growth in the country. And yet real estate was like 26% undervalued. Even at the peak of the housing peak of 2006, property in Texas was undervalued. So it just made sense. And when he explained it, like, wow, this is kind of a safe way to stay out of the coming storm. That was obvious when all these loans went bad. The fundamentals were still there in Texas. So Rich and I jumped on a plane and bought, I would say, 5 properties that first trip, with no money down loans. That was our first deal. So not a huge apartment, just 5 new homes in the Dallas area.
And how did you know about, you said you just bought the fourplex with your family, right? But how do you know you went from that? You talked to obviously the purple Bible guru Kiyosaki, and then you figured out, okay, well, it's 26% undervalued. How does one even know what that is, and how did you figure that out? Because that's what turned me on towards your podcast and stuff. I started really looking at the market.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of different companies that will do that for you. John Burns Real Estate Consulting is one. And I love John. He's got a great resource. And at the time, he was sending that data out. So you could just get on his newsletter and get free information. And he would show what the average income of was an area, the average income of an area versus the average home price, and what was out of line and what wasn't. And then on top of that, where there were more permits, then there was new jobs. So that was an indicator too of where's there overbuilding happening and just not enough people for what's coming. So with those metrics, we saw that California was like the home prices were like 10x what they should be compared to salaries. Yet in Texas, it was like 2x. So it just, basically the average home price there was $140,000 at the time. And the average income in the area was like 70, 80. So it was just like, okay, these people can afford to live here and they can afford to rent. And yet there's all this job creation and all this population growth. And the permits weren't actually keeping up with the job growth, which meant there'd probably be a shortage of inventory. So you get cash flow, but probably appreciation as well because of that.
And is that still that number? I like that number because I just bought a home in California. I barely make six figures here in Orange County, so I'm considered, below poverty line. But my home is about 1.1, 1.2, which is about 10 times what I make. So what is that in Texas like? Is it a 10 or is it like just 5 or 6?
It depends where you are. There's definitely some parts of Texas where prices went up faster than other areas. But let's take, the properties that we bought in Rockwall, Texas back then, they were 140,000. Today, they're about 400 or so. So if you were to look at the average salary from the people living there, it's probably, especially if it's dual income, probably about 200,000. So it's close, but that's a high-end area. If we're not buying there anymore, we're buying kind of an hour out from there, where homes are still under 200,000, but the salaries are going to be a bit less, although not much less because there's a lot of high professional jobs coming into the area.
And so are you still getting about 0.8%, or 0.9%? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, there's parts of the country where we're still getting the 1%. Although, I just rewrote my book, Retire Rich with Rentals. I'm like, oh man, this is outdated. I wrote it in 2014 and so much of it doesn't apply today. I mean, so much of it does, the fundamentals, but the 1% rule, I kind of look at that. And for those new to that, it basically means that the rent comes in at about 1% of the price. So if you buy a $100,000 home, your rent would be around $1,000. That's kind of just a quick way to look at a property and say, I'd like to investigate this further. Because at the end of the day, you could have a property in Alabama for $100,000 or one in Texas for $100,000, and they both have the 1% rule. Let's say they both rent for $1,000, but the difference is in Texas, you've got higher taxes, and in Birmingham, you've got lower. So you really have to dive in further to see what's the better deal, But with that said, there's still areas where you can get high cash flow.
So you got that's a good point. I do find that very interesting, and it's very interesting. We have about 30 homes, we bought over the pandemic, but I bought this place, duplex in Stone Mountain, Georgia, in DeKalb County, and I was like, I looked up, oh, okay, well, it's 1% in Georgia, so it's all good, right? Nope, that DeKalb County is 3.5%. Game over. So I'm just like, I can hold it for 100 years. I will never make money on it, right?
Yeah.
So I've had it for a year, so I'm going to sell it. We'll probably cash like 100K on it, but it's a big mistake that we made. So I just got bailed out based on the market, right? I'm not a super smart guy who figured out how to make that work. But it's just very interesting the county and the taxes, how they generate. That county has 1% just for the school. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, in sometimes parts of Florida, you might find that the insurance is extraordinarily high. You might look at a new home and say, oh, gosh, the cash flow is not going to be as good because it's more expensive. But then you find out that insurance is less for a new home and maybe the numbers actually work. So, at the end of the day, it's really the pro forma that matters. But the 1% rule is kind of let me just take a look. One example would be is if you saw in California a property for $700,000 that rents for $200,000, or I'm sorry, that would be nice, $2,000. That's probably not going to pencil for you.
Yeah, I wanted to go through your timeline because, a lot of our listeners are like friends and family and, people we meet in meetups and stuff, and they're all mostly just starting out. And it's always, great. I talked to Axel, I had Neil Bawas coming on. I talked to your buddies, Dave and Henry from your show, which I love. Anybody who's listening, check out On the Market, best show on real estate any day. It's even I would say it's better than the Bigger Pockets main show because you guys talk so much about market insights and what sellers are thinking and buyers are thinking. I want to touch on that a little bit later, but I want to follow your timeline. So you got the 4-plex and then you bought the 6-plex. So you said you have 10 homes and then you're retired, right? That's it. You never bought anything else.
No, then we went back. Yeah, no one gets tired.
Yeah.
What you get is more addicted,
I
right?
know.
And it's like, I need more. So we went back to Texas and bought about 6 more.
Mhm.
And all of those were really good decisions. And then we started making bad decisions.
Mhm.
And I wrote about that in my book, Retire Rich with Rentals, to let people know that, it's a learning curve, and hopefully I can share some of my mistakes so that other people's learning curve is not as steep. So then I thought I was a pro,
Mhm.
and then I went off track of my plan. And we bought 2 houses in Tennessee. It was a good market right outside of, oh my gosh, not Memphis, but the other big city there. I can't think of it. But we bought 2 properties that we were building. So we got construction loans. And I have told people never, be careful of short-term loans, because if it balloons and you don't have a backup plan and you can't refi, you're going to be in trouble. Well, I was teaching this, but then I went ahead and did it. I had meant to get construction to perm, but it was kind of more difficult. And I was like, oh, let's get a construction loan now and we'll refi later. Well, then the housing market crashed and banks were no longer lending and loans got capped to 10. And remember, we had already bought 12. So all of a sudden, the refi we were planning to do couldn't happen. There was no more lending available. So that was a hard lesson. We couldn't refi and the note ballooned and we couldn't close and we lost all our money on those. So
How much money was that?
I'm going to say like 100,000.
Okay.
Yeah. Like
Was
50
that
each.
Nashville? Outside Nashville?
No, it was, I can't think of it.
Oh,
Right.
it's okay.
Over by the mountains.
Okay. Oh, Smokies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so you made that, and then you're saying that, how would you have foreseen this? I mean, there's no way to foresee that, right?
Robert Kiyosaki could see it clear as day that, these banks were going to fail. How
Mhm.
the lending world was ridiculous. And I
Yeah.
actually had become a lender at that point. And I remember kind of being new in the financial services industry. So I didn't know. I just thought it was weird that I could sit at my desk and have 10 different banks come to me that day and say, please, take our loans. We go up to $5 million. No questions asked, like
Mhm.
stated income. We don't even need to call the employer. We need nothing.
Yeah.
It was like, really? And then
Mhm.
when my first loan I turned in was $1 million loan, I was able to make $10,000 on that one loan. It's like you get like 1 to 3%. So other people might have charged 3 points higher interest rate and made 30 grand. And
Mhm.
literally my job was to have them fill out an application and turn it in. So it was a very greedy industry.
Mhm.
You could see why nobody really wanted to complain because it was such easy money. But I remember the first loan I turned in, this $1 million loan, the bank came back and said, oh, they don't actually qualify. I was like, oh, that's too bad. I'll let him know. They go, no. We changed his income. Now he qualifies. I came home like, Rich, do you think that's okay? And he's like, no, I think that's fraud. I'm like, yeah, I can't put my name on that. But that's the kind of things that lenders were doing back then. So I
Yeah.
knew it was going to blow up.
I see.
It was obvious. Everyone knew it, but there was so much denial. They didn't want to see it. It was in front of your face. And I love that. What'd you call him? The purple guru?
Yeah, the Purple Bible.
I love that he could just see right through it, the obvious, state it, and then have a plan to work around it. So, it could be seen. And it was obvious that banks were going to fail with this ridiculous lending. And I knew not to get into short-term loans. And it was just laziness, honestly. So it was a hard lesson. It was kind of it won't happen quite yet type thing. We'll be fine by the time these houses are done. But it's kind of like pass the potato, or the hot potato. Like when the music stops, it stops.
Let's print more money. We'll figure it out later, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the money printing thing hadn't really started yet. That started, they did a little bit of money printing after the .com bomb in 2001, 2002. They printed a little bit, and that was after 9/11 too. But it was like, I don't know, 600 billion or something like that. Like, I remember the world going, oh my gosh, how can we print this much money? And then fast forward just a few years, and then they're doing trillions, and then some trillions more. And then fast forward another 10 years, and let's do another 4 trillion, just like it's the new normal. And then this generation thinks it's normal. So it's like, yeah, can you cancel my debt? And can you do these? Hey, can we get more things? Can you pay my unemployment a little bit longer? Because this is awesome. This is where we are, where the government has gotten into this modern monetary theory, is what they're calling it, which is simply, we're just going to keep printing money to solve all problems. And, I think, again, here we are where you could just say, let me check in with my gut here. I kind of think that's not going to work. But no one wants to admit it. But that's a fact. This is not going to end well. We don't know how it's going to end. But when you solve all problems with printing more money, I can tell you one thing, we're going to see more inflation.
Yeah, it's very interesting, when you print money and you don't have GDP output to support it, it's just basic common sense that the value of the paper is not as much, right? Because nobody's doing any work. Like US is not making more tires or more cars or more Teslas. And in fact, we made nothing for years, and we printed way more than before.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weird. So, yeah, let's go back to I like your storyline. So you learned a good lesson, and then did you decide to pivot, or did you and Rich have a talk, and you guys had like a game plan after that?
Well, we ruined our credit by, not being able to close on those construction loans. We just handed them back to the bank, and they got all the upside. It was such a bummer. So all of a sudden, housing prices collapsed and our credit was ruined, and we couldn't really take advantage of that. At least we didn't quite know how. I think now with the knowledge I have, I would have done it. But I got really lucky in 2009. A developer heard me on the Real Wealth show, and he said, I'm finding ridiculous deals. He said he would go into the banks. The banks were just collapsing with all their bad loans, and they had boxes and boxes and boxes of properties they had to take back. And the properties that they really didn't know what to do with were development projects and land. What's a bank going to do with that? And nobody wanted it. So, but developers did. And this man called and said, I'm a 40-year veteran developer. I pick up these kind of distressed assets about every 10 years. Never seen anything like this. He said he just found 27 townhomes waterfront in Portland, that the loan had been 12 million. The value was about 20 million, and he could get it for 3 million. So he said, do you think you can raise 3 million? I didn't know anything about syndications, but I said, I don't know. Let me see. And I sent out an email to my list and said, there's this deal, anybody interested? And I had 3 million in commitments in about 15 minutes. But what I also had was an email from a friend who said, you can't do that. That is not how you raise money. That's illegal. You need a private placement memorandum. You need an attorney to set that up. I said, oh, okay, I didn't know. So I did. I found a securities attorney, and he set it up properly. And I did my first syndication. We acquired all those townhomes. They were 70% complete when the bank failed. So we just kind of came in and finished them. And investors made about a 20% return, in 2010 during the darkest part of the recession. And that led to a lot more syndications with that developer and a few other ones who maybe weren't as good.
Very interesting. So did you know how to underwrite deals back then, Kathy? Like, did you figure out the math? Like, oh, okay, this is the DSCR, this is NOIs, the cap rates, and all that stuff? Or
Well, it was a development, so we weren't holding.
okay.
This was my
Oh, so you were going to just sell them?
just flipping.
Oh, okay.
I wish I told him I want to keep them, but the problem was there was no loans. And well, I guess now in retrospect, we could have just told the investors we're holding it. He wasn't thinking that way because he was a developer and his job
Sure.
was to sell property. But I remember saying, no, can't we just hold them? Which in retrospect would have been awesome because they went up, 3 or 4 times in value.
Yeah.
But we also made money too. And of course, the tax benefits are better if you hold. When you
Yeah.
sell it, you're paying ordinary income.
So, so this might be a good thing we can catch and put on Instagram is, you and I know holding is the best and flipping is, not the best. But can you tell our listeners, like, why is it flipping? I don't consider flipping investing. So why do you say hold versus flip it?
Well, flipping is a business. It's
Yes.
it's an active business. It's very lucrative if you do it right. But you're right, it's not investing. You're making a return. And that return is taxed ordinary income. So you're losing out on so many of the reasons to invest in real estate. If you could just buy the property, fix it up, and hold it for at least a year, at least then you're taxed capital gain. Or you could potentially 1031. But that's not necessarily how flippers are thinking. And sometimes they're in short-term loans that they need to pay off. But yeah, it's flipping is a job. Buy and hold is an investment.
Yeah, that's why I find it always funny when I go to these meetups and I meet all these people. They're like, "Oh, we're all in real estate." I'm like, "You're not in real estate. You have a job. Like, you're a realtor. Like, you sell homes. Like, you have a fancy car with a high liability payment and $10,000 in rent that you got to pay in Newport Beach." But they don't understand it, even though people are in it. Why do you think that is? I find it so fascinating. People in real estate don't understand the difference between investing and like just working.
They didn't read the purple book.
They didn't read that. And they have to read the follow-up book, Cash Flow Quadrant. You got to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the key. I'm sure they want to. Realtors in California would probably love to own property and own investment property. It's just so expensive. Doesn't really make sense. So they may get to a point where they can buy their own property, and they may even get to a point where they can rent some rooms out or Airbnb it. But to kind of do ongoing buy and hold in California can be pretty rough. You need a lot of money, and it's not very high cash flow unless maybe you're doing a short-term rental, but that's a job too. Again, unless
Yeah.
you have a property manager, but they can take 20-25%. So I just think it all comes down to education. I was with Keller Williams for several years, very good company. They have excellent training. And I thought, well, gosh, you guys have training every single day on how to be a great real estate agent. How about I do a training on how to be an investor? They're like, yeah, that sounds great. So I would do it once a week. I would hold my little hour-long class on how to actually hold property and keep property and cash flow. No one showed up. I would get like 2 people. So I want to say it's a lack of education, but not because the education is not there. I was like telling people, come to my event, this is going to change your life. And no, it was maybe the instant gratification. I don't know.
It's much easier to buy a BMW than to put that money into a house and wait for it for 4 years. When I started, I told people, I started buying, I'm sure you're familiar with Kern County, Bakersfield, right? So I started buying there in about 2018, and we built up I don't know, 25 units or something like that. And then this is where, there's not a lot of cash flow. It's you say it's high cap rate, it's garbage. There's too much turnover and there's no money in it. However, the market was going up, and then I was making a lot of equity in those deals. And then I started listening to more things that were more interesting to me, was like how you talk about like the markets and like what's happening with the Feds, what's QT, what's QE, what's happening monetary policy. And then I predicted, okay, well, Kathy's got some interesting points. So I started selling off a lot of my non-performing assets. The only mistake I made was how long it takes to sell in Bakersfield. It takes a little bit longer. But I did sell off all my not so good assets, and I started pivoting to Inland Empire, and I started now buying in Orange County, where the cash flow is less, cap rate's low, but then the appreciation's a little bit better, and then the tenants pay on time, they have good credit, so they don't want to mess it up. A lot of interesting things. So how did you know all these things about the market, and how do you figure that out? Because that's what's most interesting. Because if I didn't listen to your show, I would have all those garbage units right now, and I'll be like struggling, right? I would have been like really, really bad.
Oh, wow. I that means so much. You never know who's listening, right?
I know.
I don't get feedback. Yeah. It's not like my live radio show where people would call in and I'd get instant feedback. I never have any idea what people are thinking. So it means a lot when you say that. I would say the answer is I'm just really obsessed. I'm just like extremely obsessed with understanding what can derail your plan. And it may be because I watched my dad struggle with that. He was he was an immigrant, came from poverty, ended up dropping out of school, going into the military, fighting World War II, getting his degree there, finishing high school in the military, and became a dentist and provided for us 5 children. He was such a success story, but he didn't know how to invest. And the things that he invested in were just awful. He would trust friends from church. And I remember being a little girl going, Dad, like what? Why are you investing in architectural printers? Like how many people actually need those? And he'd be like, yeah, but Joe from, and then he wanted to do like a Christian bookstore in Vegas. And I said, Dad, no one's going to Vegas to meet God. Like that's not, yeah. I get what you're trying. It's the
last place. Yeah.
Right. I get what you're trying to do here. You're trying to save souls, but you're not going to save any in Vegas. So it was those kinds of things, like good-hearted, but didn't work out. And then of course the meeting with, the Google angel investor and kind of not seeing that. So I just, wanted to not get derailed and not be taken by surprise. And because I started in this business in the 2000s as a mortgage broker and watching the unbelievable greed that major Wall Street firms were participating in. And, you would just say, how could they be this stupid to give these huge loans to people who have no evidence of being able to pay you back? Such bad business decisions. So I watched as sort of a newbie going, okay, you just can't really trust anyone here. You got to fend for yourself, and you need to figure out how they're manipulating you. I was just in Portugal. I know that sounds negative, but it's just what I came away with after seeing the way that the mortgage industry and the greed within it took down the entire world economy. It was very sad because I was in Portugal just last week looking at the Golden Visa program, which is really cool. You can buy real estate there and get an EU passport. So I'm going to be actually doing a webinar on that really soon. I'm excited about that. But, and I was talking to the developers there. They explained that, banks in Europe, banks all over the world were buying these bad mortgages. And when they failed, the economies went down worldwide. And so this developer was saying they're still trying to come out of the mess that America made from that. So I look at today's situation and say, well, we're just making another one. We're treating money like it's, like it can be printed. You shouldn't be able to do that. Just print money. And that's gonna have an impact when they suddenly realize, well, maybe this isn't the way that it's, maybe this isn't going to end well,
Yeah. So, with all that being said, so you also somehow in the middle of all these things figured out how to raise capital, looks like, right? And that's from your failed attempt at raising $3 million in 10 minutes. But it's because of your platform and because you had this podcast and the radio show, you were able to have a list of people And so you can talk to them and kind of you already did a lot of the things right, even without knowing about it, right? So what do you have to say about developing a platform or like a thought platform or something for people to follow? How does that help you?
My husband is he's a marketing genius. So I learn a lot from him. He actually has his audiobook out today called
The Wise Investor.
The Wise Investor. And it's
Mhm.
so cute. It's a parable. So he had to do like 9 different voices of the different characters in the parable. Like, honey, are you sure you don't want to have like an actor read this stuff? But he did it. And it's just wonderful. It's so fun. It's so fun to hear the audiobook. So came out today. But he's just really good at marketing. And one of the first things that he said was the most important thing you can do is build a following. Build a following of people who trust you. They, as they say, they know, like, and trust you. And I had seen that because my career grew so quickly from having a radio show. When I became, basically the way it worked is after the cancer scare, we really needed some cash because Rich was needing some time off to take care of himself. And I had to figure out how to make money. And the only way I knew how to do it was sponsorships for this radio show that would allow me to still be home with the kids and home with Rich. So I found a mortgage broker to sponsor the show. And basically the way that we kept the audience engaged so they wouldn't be bored out of their minds learning about mortgages. Like who wants to hear that? We kept it interesting by interviewing his clients and finding out what they were doing with these loans. So we really made it human interest. The audience just grew overnight from what I thought could be a situation where I'd lose my audience from boring mortgage talk. But instead, we grew it because we kept it interesting and hopeful, gave people an idea, like a peek into the world of the wealthy, and interviewed his clients who were borrowing money to do fix and flips, to do BRRRRs, which wasn't called that back then, but basically the strategy of buying, fixing, and then refi, getting all your money back and doing it again. There were people that would live in a property for 2 years, fix it up. When you sell, you get $500,000 gain tax-free if you're married. These were things I had never heard of. And I was giving people a peek into the window of the world of investing through human interest stories. And that grew and grew and grew. Now, I had no idea how I'd monetize it. But again, my husband's like, it doesn't matter. You just want to grow an audience. And someday you will have something to sell them or to get, to offer them. So sure enough, the phones were ringing off the hook of people who wanted mortgages. They're like, I want to do what these people are doing. And my sponsor got so many calls. His phones were ringing off the hook. He's like, I can't handle all this business. Get your license and become a mortgage broker. So it's just an example of had I started as a mortgage broker without the following and without the radio show, I would have been struggling. Like, how do you, go to meetups and, hey, can I give you a loan? I mean, that would have been hard. But instead, I was one of the busiest mortgage brokers practically overnight because I'd already established myself.
And you started this podcast just for fun?
No, my degree was in broadcasting. I worked in
Okay.
newsrooms in San Francisco. And when I married Rich and we had children, I didn't want to be chasing fires and interviewing murderers and, like doing all the things. There were strikes. There was one night there was a writer's strike at ABC where I was working, and they wanted me to come in from midnight to 8 a.m. to march during the strike. I'm like, I was 9 months pregnant. I'm like, dude, like I'm pregnant. I still had to go do it. So I quit and just was lucky enough to be able to be a stay-at-home mom. But I love broadcasting. So I asked the station if I could, keep a radio show on the weekend. I didn't get paid, but it kind of kept me in the industry. So all of this started as radio, and podcasts didn't even exist. But about whenever they happened, I don't know, 2006 or 7 or something, Rich was like, oh, this is cool. We can just upload your radio show onto this new thing called podcasts. So I suddenly, using Rich's advice of, the most important thing you can do is grow an audience that trusts you and again, knows, likes, and trusts you. He just took it, uploaded it, and within a week, I had listeners worldwide. I think shortly after that, I got a call from someone in Australia saying, hey, can we fly you out to Australia and come speak to 1,000 investors here about how to buy US real estate? That was all just because Rich uploaded my my radio show into iTunes.
How did people find you on iTunes?
Oh, there weren't
Like,
very many people. I was like one of the first podcasts.
oh, I see.
Yeah, I mean, it
So,
was brand new.
so this was like way before like Joe Fairless was doing his thing,
Oh
huh?
yeah, Joe came to me for advice on
Oh,
how to
really?
start
That's
a
cool.
podcast. Yeah, it was just luck, time, good luck and timing. And Rich being a early adopter, that's one of his strengths. He understands technology. I mean, we've been doing this before there really was technology. So we've been watching it. You know, we were one of the first to do webinars. Nobody knew what that was. We were doing them in 2005. I think it started with teleseminars. You know, we'd have a group on just a conference call, and it was like, whoa, what's this thing called a webinar? And we were one of the first to do it. Nobody could figure out how to get on and log on, but you know, so he was always ahead of that. And he and I had a big fight one day because he wanted an iPod, and I was like, that's so dumb. Why don't you just use a cassette tape? What do you need to, you know, spend $350 just to listen to 100 songs? And he insisted. So he won that battle, got this iPod. But it was that one day he just got a message on his iPod saying, hey, we're now accepting shows. And it was that sort of early adopter for technology that has opened many doors. He also learned right when streaming was starting to be a thing, that one of the best things you can do is put a video on your webpage. And nobody was doing that. And many people still didn't even have websites. So he's like, oh, it looks like you're supposed to put you can stream this video. So he takes me outside of our office and it's like, tell me what you do. And I was like, oh, we help people buy investment property in Dallas. And, and he puts that video on the website. Goldman Sachs sees it. And I ended up winning this top 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs by Goldman Sachs 3-day celebration event. I got to meet the CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, partied with him for 3 days with Elon Musk. And it was like, what am I doing here? I don't know. My husband put a video on our website, so that his savvy with technology has brought a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's very interesting. So you had a platform, you had Rich helped you out, you had this. So did you kind of tailor your investing strategy to what you were hearing from people, or did you have something already figured out from your experience and then you brought that to the people? How did you?
I had no idea what I was doing. No idea. All I was really doing was trying to understand money. And it wasn't something I was taught. It started out just wanting to take care of my husband and not have him feel like he had to work all the time during this difficult time period that we were in. I desperately needed income, so I started renting out rooms in our home, and that was like, oh wow, that just brought in a bunch of money. So it started with desperation of how can I don't want to leave for 10 hours and go get a job and be away from my family. My family needs me right now. So the show was really just a desperate attempt to understand something I needed to understand. But I also opened the minds of my listeners because they wanted to learn it too.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's really, people don't usually share. They always share like the Instagram reels of your wins, right? So that's interesting. Right now I'm 36 years old and I rent rooms in my house because the mortgage is like $6,000, it's a lot. So, but I live in $1 million house, which I own by myself. So it's like, okay, well.
Why wouldn't you? We still do it. We
Yeah.
still do it. We have a guest house on our property and I rent it.
Yeah.
People are like, why do you do that? You're like, why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah,
It's money.
It doesn't make sense not to do it. What are you going to
Yeah.
do? Pay $4,000 and live by yourself, like on a rent?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. I was going to ask you, since you're talking about that, just a philosophical question, and then we can move on to the current market conditions, which is what I would love to talk about. We have like 5 minutes. Do you think there is some kind of all the rich people, they don't want to tell everybody else the truth. They want to keep the money like a secret, like how to make money. And then all these schools and education trains us to be employees, or do you think that's this conspiracy theory?
I was blown away by how generous the wealthy people I met were, that they were so willing to share and help. I'm sure there's people who aren't, but
Yeah.
in my journey, it's been nothing but generosity and people wanting to help and support. With that said, in the real estate industry, there are so many sharks. There are people who could give a darn about you. They're happy to take your money and sell you garbage. It's why you've got to know, you've got to do your due diligence.
Yeah.
I describe it a little bit as, I feel like the wealthy aren't coming from that place, but people trying to be wealthy may be willing to step on you and rip you off to get there. That's just been my experience. It's kind of like when I took my family to Costa Rica for a vacation, and I made the very stupid mistake of not looking at what the exchange rate was. So at the airport, I got some money, and I just had no idea what it was worth. And we just made a quick stop at a little restaurant, and I'm like, oh, let's get some of these little sandwiches. And I just kind of put the money out in front of them because I had no idea how to speak the language or what I was looking at or how much it was. And they just took the money out of my hands. And then I walked out. I was like, I don't know what I just paid for these sandwiches. And I heard them laughing behind me. And I just look at my family. I think I just got ripped off, but whose fault is it? It's mine, because I have no idea what this money's worth. So it was kind of I might have paid $40 for a $10 sandwich, but so not a great loss. But the point being, it's up to us, right? You don't get ripped off if you don't allow yourself to get ripped off. You get ripped off if you're naive and if you haven't done your homework.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is the one question everybody asks me. If everybody is Kathy Fettke, who is renting from her? That doesn't work. So your game only works if some of you guys are rich and everybody has a house to rent from you. So what do you tell to these guys?
I've been teaching how to build wealth through real estate for 20 years now, and the homeownership rate is the same. So, it's not like investors have come in and destroyed, the opportunity for people to buy. That's just not the case. It's the same as it was. There was a little bit higher homeownership rate when you could give a loan to anybody, but there will always be around 30, 35%, sometimes 40% of people who don't want to buy. They just, they don't want to. I mean, my daughter is 22. Why would she want to buy a home? Doesn't know where she wants to live. She wants to rent. And there's people who come to America for a job for a year, or construction workers who have to go to a certain area to do a job for a certain period of time, and they're going to rent. Not everybody's going to buy. There's always, around 30, 35% of people who just don't want the headaches of owning property. There's a lot of young people who just are like, no, I don't want to fix anything. I want my landlord to do it, and I just want to pay the rent. Now they might change their mind when they understand the benefits of owning, but no, there's plenty of people who we're providing a great service to.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Yeah, I don't believe this is a zero-sum game at all. There's a lot for everyone. We're adding a lot of value. I usually tell people, did you want to take a risk and lose $200,000, everything I had, and put it into 2 properties and hope people pay rent? No, that's the reward, is I am a millionaire, right? We take those risks year after year, try to invest in areas, try to make the area better, put nicer families in, so the reward is, you become a millionaire doing it. You also help other people who invest with you. So we've talked a lot. So finishing up, let's talk about the market. I know this is something people want to hear. Everybody's freaking out. They're like, interest rates are high. They're always saying the same thing. Interest rates are either high or the prices are too high. So if the interest rates are high, they say, it's catching a fallen knife. So, these guys never get into doing anything. So what do you tell these guys? Tell us the truth, Kathy. Is the market actually crashing or not?
Well, you should be concerned simply because it wasn't that long ago that the market did crash, and that was a scary time. So we can learn from the past. However, where we are today is totally opposite of where we were in 2008. In 2008, I was part of an industry that did zero qualification of borrowers. Today, you know what it's like to get a loan. It's painful, and they want every document 10 times over. Like, hey, can you send that document again? Can you send it again? It's super painful to get a loan. You have to qualify. You have to put money down. And I think it's 90% of homeowners today are locked into mortgages that are far less than today's rates. So you have homeowners today, the people who own homes have the most equity that there's ever been. They have the lowest interest rates and the lowest payments. They have the highest FICO scores, and they had to put money down. So why would somebody think that that's going to change? You know, the problem is that it's kind of the lock-in effect is what it's called. You're not going anywhere. Like, I would never sell this house right now because I'm in a 3% interest rate. Why would I double it? You know, like, it's ridiculous. I'd have to get half a house. I have twice the house that I could have if I sold it and got another one today. So, you know, why would I do that? So unless you're really facing distress, you know, you're going to hold on to your house. So that's why we've seen, even though there's all this talk of a housing crash, we're actually seeing listings go down, you know, because people are like, well, I'm not going to sell in an environment where I'm not going to get top dollar and not going to be able to find a better deal. I'm going to have a higher interest rate. That's ridiculous. So they're going to stay put. They're going to stay put or rent. You know, if they don't want to stay in that area or they have a job change, people have learned that they can rent and cash flow because they're in such low payments right now.
That's true. Yeah, I believe the same thing. Now, however, the market has shifted, right? So I bought my home, my primary residence, in February, I believe. It was listed at $1 million, and I paid $75,000 over asking, right? And we just put up another one just near my house. I live in Costa Mesa, so like down the street from my house, and they had it in the market for 1.35. They reduced it to 1.25 and then had it at 1.2. And then I bid on it and I got it locked in today at 1.1. So
wow. So you're buying another one in your neighborhood?
I'm buying another one in my neighborhood, and my buddy Drew, he's going to live in it. So it's going to be another, you know, property for us. But there's two, you know, with I don't know if you know, with the mortgage stuff now, people listening, agency debt, Fannie and Freddie have agreed to accept ADU rents now to qualify for the mortgages.
Nice.
So this has a little ADU on the top. So even though mortgage is going to be like $7,000, the ADU rent is like $3,000. So we only need to show, you know, a little bit less.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
So yeah, so do you see the market shifting a little bit? Because I do see some prices. I'm making some adjustments when I have stuff I'm still selling. I got 4 properties I'm selling in Bakersfield right now, and then I'm adjusting the price a little bit now. They want some credits and stuff. So what do you say about that?
Oh, it's definitely shifting. That's what the Federal Reserve is trying to do.
It's healthy too, right?
Yeah. It was too hot of a market. You can't have 20% price gains or more. You know, some areas we're seeing 30 and 40% price gains. That's unsustainable and that's unhealthy. So the whole point of raising rates was to slow that down. And that's been warned since January of this year that the Fed was going to do that. So there was no surprise there. People should not have been taken off guard. It was very, very clear what was happening. I gave a talk in February saying, you guys, be aware. You know, I said,
that's why I sold everything. I listened to that talk. I'm serious.
Good. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I'm so glad. Yeah, it's like I asked a room of 1,000 people, you know, who thinks there's going to be you know, a change in the market. And nobody, like, people oftentimes don't want to see reality, but, you know, I'm glad that you took action. So the bottom line is this was predicted. However, prices overall, and there's no one market, there's no housing market, every market's different. But if you take the average on the national housing market, then, or, you know, if you take the average of everything, prices are still up 10% than they were last year at this time. So that means that if you bought in the last year, you probably lost about 10% because prices were up 20% from last year. And now they're only up 10% from last year. So who that really affects is anybody who bought property since November of last year. you've probably lost a little bit of value. Anybody before that, you haven't really probably lost value from what you paid. So, but anyone who bought property in the last 9 months, you probably weren't planning on selling it. If you were a flipper, yeah, you're feeling it. If you were planning on buying and selling, you're feeling it. I know flippers are having a tough time, but they should have been prepared because this has been, there's been a warning since January. But like my daughter, she bought in January of this year. She's locked into low rates. She overpaid. We knew that. But she has a house. She has a 4-bedroom house. She has a fixed rate. She's going to raise her family there. She's in a good school district. She has 0 plans to move. She doesn't care, right? She doesn't care. So for most people who bought in the last 9 months, they were desperate to have a place to live. And they didn't want to be in a situation where either they didn't have a choice of where to live, or they were going to see rents go up every year, which we've seen and we're going to continue to see. So if you're one of those people in that camp and you just want a fixed payment, like my daughter, you're going to stay, because I looked at what's for rent in the area where she lives. There's nothing. And she has 2 dogs and a baby. Like nobody's taking 2 dogs. So,
Yeah.
so she's happy. And 5, 10, 15 years from now, when they sell, there's a good chance the property will be worth more. It's just for the next 15 years, she doesn't have to worry about it,
So
and she can put an ADU on too.
Oh yeah, that's true. And there's a new grant for about $40,000 in California if you want to put an ADU in your primary. So that's awesome.
Wow. I didn't know that. Oh,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
cool. I'll let her know.
You can use that money for anything other than actual labor and cost of the building, but you could use it to buy down the rate. You could use it to get permits, surveys.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's really cool. Okay, so so your recommendation is continue buying, just do the numbers, make sure you can afford the payments, right?
Yeah, I mean, right now you have a situation where mortgages have gone up, home prices have gone up. That's forcing more people to rent. So the rental demand is only going to increase. So we just, of course, I actually am starting a single family rental fund. We're going to gobble up as many properties as we can. I know that sounds bad in today's environment, but we're going to be providing rental housing to people who desperately need it and want it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kathy. I don't want you to keep too long. So if people want to reach out to you, what is the best way to reach you?
Realwealth.com is our website where there's so much education, and we have property teams across the country that can help you acquire property. Also growdevelopments.com is my syndication company. If you're interested in the single family fund, it's a 506c, so I can talk about it. And then of course the Real Wealth Show and Real Estate News podcasts.
Nice. Awesome. And we'll probably release this before the event, but you will be in BPCon as well, right?
I will.
Yeah, I'll be there too. I'll see you there.
Wonderful. I'll see you there.
All right. Thank you so much, Kathy.
All right. Take care.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.